The IB Diploma is, without question, the best post-16 educational pathway in the world. Many educational systems, once you get past the age of 16, are really just about gaining the best grades you can. What the IB Diploma says is, we want you to gain the best grades, but we also want you to have a balanced life. All of that happens not in the spirit of toxic competition, but in the spirit of common humanity and togetherness. GPA, this is the grade point average in the United States, is not nearly as important a factor in university admission as the IB Diploma. If a student has to choose the diploma over protecting the GPA. Hello, good morning, good evening, good afternoon. Welcome to Sparkl's discussion of why we should undertake the IB Diploma. We're targeting prospective families for this conversation because I think it's very important when we come to think about students' learning pathway, if you like, to recognise that behind every child making choices, actually there's a family trying to decide what is best for their child. And I'm Neil Allen. I'm an IB educator in the sense that I've taught the IB for many years in schools. I do some work for the IB and for various IB providers to try to talk about how we teach the program effectively and how we should learn the program effectively. And of course, I'm a big advocate for the program, both as a teacher, as a school principal or former school principal, also as a parent of an IB Diploma graduate. I can speak quite personally for the idea of why I think the IB Diploma is, without question, the best post-16 educational pathway in the world, and why I think it's actually something that's really valuable for all students. Of course, all kids are different, and there are different things they can choose, but I'm going to try to advocate why I think the IB Diploma could be a very, very good choice for your child. So I've been talking for a few weeks now about in particular the English A Language and Literature program and why it's an interesting program to undertake. In particular, how IB English differs from traditional study. Some real deep digging of the assessment components of the program and how papers 1 and 2, the individual oral and the higher level essay, how they add together to create the overall program and how students can be successful in them. And finally, what we're going to talk about to finish off this series of podcasts is why the IB Diploma is an excellent choice for you and for your child. Let's have a little conversation about the IB Diploma learning in itself. Well, we've been talking about the English program. I've come to the conclusion after 20 years of teaching it and 20 years of training teachers to teach it and 20 years of working with students in other schools on the program, that essentially it's a course about global issues studied through or explored through the lens of literature and what I call non-literature, non-literary bodies of work is the technical term. So essentially, we're looking at those two mediums of the language arts, if you will, and therefore using them to explore the hot topics of the day and the world we live in and the world we have lived in the past and the world we might live in the future. If I'm going to zoom out from that analysis of the English course and look at the IB Diploma program as a whole, the whole thing that students undertake together as a diploma, because it's not like A-levels, for example, where they might pick and choose individual subjects that all kind of count separately. It is a diploma. You have to complete certain things all together to gain the diploma at the end. I would say it's very similar. It's essentially a program about global issues explored through the 6 main areas of knowledge. I'll come into that shortly. How do students learn? We've talked about this before. They learn through a process of guided inquiry. The courses are designed that way. The IB and I are big believers in the idea that this is the best and most effective and long-lasting way of learning about ideas is studying through guided inquiry. The IB has a learner profile. It wasn't it's not the only, but it was the first post-16 or even through school educational design that put the learner at the center. So instead of saying, here's a load of stuff that we need to teach kids in school, instead it said, what kind of people do we want to create at the end of school? And what should we teach them? The IB, the learner profile, essentially outlines the 10 characteristics of young people and young learners. And rather than school being about, here's a whole load of things we're going to force on children so they learn and they are knowledgeable about things. Instead, it says, what kind of young people do we want to create? And therefore, what should we teach them? And how should we teach them? And how will that make them into better, well-educated and better learners for the future? So I think that's a real selling point of the IB Diploma program. Essentially, here's a beautiful verbose sentence for you. Students engage with big ideas and wider implications of their subject's content in the broader societal and global context. Essentially, what that means is it's an ideas-based program. It's not specific, concrete, and discrete knowledge that they learn, but we're trying to teach them ideas and to apply those ideas to different situations. And all of that content, if you like, that they're learning is content that is valuable for the overall, the overall study of the world and its issues. And finally, it's a broad and holistic program in a sense. If we can contrast it to, for example, UK-style A-levels, where students might choose 3 or 4 subjects, and often those subjects are quite closely linked academically, maths, further maths, chemistry, and physics, for example. The actual program is very broad, and I'll talk about this shortly. I'll show you a visual, but those academic subjects are actually across the subject disciplines, and on top of that, there is the IB Diploma core of TOK, Extended Essay and CAS, again, that I'll talk about shortly. That means their study is even broader and more varied. So I think these are the big benefits of the IB Diploma. What is it and what does it hope to develop? It basically hopes to develop 3 things. It allows all young people to embody the 10 characteristics of the IB learner profile. It allows all young people to study a broad and balanced collection of academic subjects, as well as the core requirements of theory of knowledge, extended essay, and CAS. And it allows all young people to develop 5 additional skills required to enable them to become effective lifelong learners. I'm going to dig into each of those 3 things right now. The IB learner profile has these 10 characteristics associated with them. They are inquirers, knowledgeable thinkers. So 3 characteristics that I think would be fairly typical in school. Even if we go back 100 years, we want students to be knowledgeable and be able to think. Yes, that's true. Possibly the term inquire would not have been there in the Victorian era, but we definitely have this idea of being knowledgeable about stuff. Communicators, for sure, teaching students to read and write, to talk, probably also. Then we get into things that are much more character-based. The idea that learners are principled, that they're open-minded, that they are caring. That I think feels quite important. In our subject, in English, we're talking about the idea of developing empathy. And the idea that this is essential, required characteristic in the program feels to me to be something very valuable. We want people who can take risks, that they're not just receiving information and doing the safest thing possible. They're actually taking risks in their learning. They're taking risks in their life choices. They are able and willing to embrace unfamiliar situations. It obviously connects with being open-minded as well. And then the idea of being balanced and reflective. The idea that we have a healthy life is a balanced life, and that we can reflect on our learning in order to learn better in the future. So that's the IB learner profile. We also in terms of being balanced, as we mentioned in the profile, if we look at how the diploma program fits together, at the center there, you have the IB learner profile, the characters, and around it, you have the approaches to teaching and the approaches to learning. There are 8 approaches to teaching, but I've mentioned a number of times what good teaching looks like and this term of inquiry. So we won't delve into that too much for the purposes of prospective parents, such as yourselves. That's obviously something I'd look at with teachers quite a lot. The approaches to learning skills I will talk about after this little segment here. Around the student and the way that we teach and try and get them to learn, we have the IB Diploma core, and it then says the theory of knowledge, the extended essay, and creativity, activity, service. All students have to undertake these 3 components of the core. The theory of knowledge is an academic subject that students take in school on top of their 6 other subjects. And the subject is essentially trying to get students to understand the nature of knowledge itself, and in particular, the nature of knowledge in the 6 different subject disciplines. So those 6 disciplines go around the core: studies in language and literature, we've spoken about, individual societies, mathematics, the arts, sciences, and language acquisition. So there are the 6 subject areas going around clockwise. And the nature of knowledge is different in each of those areas. The nature of the knowledge we gain from reading a work of literature is quite different to the knowledge we gain in the sciences. The actual knowledge itself, the outcome is quite different. What we can say about that knowledge once we have it is quite different. And the way we gain that knowledge in those 2 different subject areas is quite different. And the theory of knowledge helps us to understand these different types of knowledge, as well as our development of that knowledge. So a very simple TOK question is, how do we know what we know? And how do we know it's true? So big questions. One of the great highlights of the IB Diploma program is that any student and every student gains access to that kind of thinking while they're still in high school. The second pillar, if you like, of the core is the extended essay. The extended essay, students write a university-style research paper, including secondary research, a review of secondary research, a study of primary research, depending on the subject area and what it looks like, will depend what it looks like. And the essay is 4,000 words with proper citation and bibliographies and things like that. So essentially, it's a university-style essay in high school, and it's of a topic of a student's choice. They devise the line of inquiry, they devise the research question, they carry out the research, and they justify the research and validate the outcomes, etc. Possibly the thing that makes IB Diploma graduates so university ready, maybe more than anything else. The final one, which I think is so important for a balanced lifestyle, is creativity, activity, service. Many educational systems, once you get past the age of 16, are really just about gaining the best grades you can in those subjects. And what the IB Diploma says is, we want you to gain the best grades, but we also want you to have a balanced life in which you have some creativity in your life, when you have some activity and physical exertion in your life, and you have some service in your life. Students basically have to evidence that they are doing these things. So, for example, that they're playing guitar and having guitar lessons, or even just playing for themselves outside of their academic studies, that they're keeping themselves physically active, playing for a sports team, going running, going to the gym, all of these things with a supervisor that can validate that they have done this and they have been making progress and setting themselves ambitious targets, etc. And service, recognizing relative privilege, probably, if you're taking the IB Diploma, and that the world needs people to help to make society function, and also to give back and support perhaps those who are less successful, less well off, less fortunate than themselves. So really, really valuable core element of the program that I think sets it apart from every other post-16 educational program for the kind of young people we want to create. Finally, we want young people to become effective lifelong learners. There's no point in them being really good at school and being hopeless at learning for themselves when they leave school, and they've no longer got school teachers and school principals and parents helping them. So the IB has the approaches to learning skills that they ask, nay, insist all of us to develop all the way through school, and in ways that are both implicit but also explicit, so that we have programs in school that we are consciously trying to develop our students' thinking skills and communication skills and social skills, self-management skills and research skills. I won't bore you with all the different ways in which that can be developed effectively in schools. That's something I would do as a school principal with staff, or as an educational consultant with school and school leaders. But I think suffice it to say that the fact that the IB says, I don't just want kids who get an A in maths and an A in English and an A in biology because they know the things. I want them to be able to be good thinkers and good communicators and have good social skills, be able to manage themselves effectively and have good research skills. And we put programs in place in our schools to help develop that. Okay, I think that's, a fabulous design of a program, and I think it's one of the great selling points to you as parents. Is one of the things that I see as a parent in my IB Diploma graduate, that she's very able to manage herself. She can research, she can talk, she can think. These put your mind at rest as a parent and think, okay, my kid's going to be okay. So I've mentioned a little bit about the IB's mission because it's at the top of the IB learner profile. The fundamental aim of all IB programs is to develop internationally minded people who, recognizing their common humanity and shared guardianship of the planet, help to create a better and more peaceful world. That is a lofty but valuable goal. While our kids will study what they need to know in maths and what they need to know in biology and what they need to know in geography, we should rest assured that they're studying it through an important overarching lens, which is, whatever the state of the world or whatever the newspapers sometimes tell us, as human beings, we have more in common with each other than differences. And actually, to understand and appreciate and celebrate different people from different places with different cultures, and recognize that the problems of the world are actually shared problems, in particular, environmental disaster and things like that. And we'd be better off working together and supporting each other rather than getting into sort of petty nationalistic squabbles and one-upmanship, if you like. Then we're more likely to have a better, more sustainable, more peaceful world. And that's not a bad goal to have and to support our 16, 17 and 18-year-olds with. So, for me, as an educator and as a parent, that's the sort of education I would like to see for my children, rather than go to school to put yourself in direct competition with everybody to get the best possible grades so we can go to college and we can get the best possible grades to get the best possible jobs in order to maximize our own wealth for ourselves, etc., etc., etc. The IB Diploma, as I'll show you in a minute, really does get kids great academic credentials and help them to get into great colleges and universities and help them to get great jobs and make money and have a great individual life. But all of that happens not in the spirit of toxic competition, but in the spirit of common humanity and togetherness. And I think that's a great thing. Somewhere in the IB Diploma's mission statement, it also talks about how others with their differences can also be right. And the reason that phrase sort of sticks out to me, I think, in the social media world, where the anonymity of communication on the internet has actually taken away this great thing that we have in human nature, which is the human face creates empathy And it's much harder to look someone in the face and say something horrible to them because you see the hurt in their eyes, etc., etc. But we're quite good at saying horrible things online. And social media has created, in my opinion, this increasingly partisan and stratified level of opinion. So everything is totally binary and totally extreme, and there can't possibly be any areas in the middle or any grey areas or any cultural differences that reflect different attitudes. And this little cartoon that I use in my English teaching is something worth thinking about. Actually, what we want to try and create is a world where people recognise that different people are different cultures are different, and others with differences can also be right. We don't have a monopoly of opinion of what's right and what's wrong. And therefore that might lead to a little bit more of the common humanity, a little bit more of willingness to understand, tolerate, listen, ask questions, celebrate difference rather than just shouting at each other all the time online. And again, for me, increasingly in a social media world, that's a pretty lofty and worthwhile ambition, something I want for my children. So all of that said, and I've deliberately started with the lofty goals of the programme, let's be honest, the other thing we want as parents is that our kids have access to a great next level of education so they can enjoy their studies and be successful, but so they can go on and get good jobs, etc., etc. It's not something that I object to at all. I think it's really important and it's really healthy. And there's great higher educational institutions all around the world, and we want to get our kids access to them because why not? Does the IB Diploma do that is the question. The answer is absolutely. What advantages do students have in higher education? Let's look at this quotation first of all. IB is well known to us for excellent preparation. Success in an IB program correlates well with success at Harvard, of all places. We are always pleased to see the credentials of the IB Diploma program on the transcript. GPA, this is the grade point average in the United States, is not nearly as important a factor in university admission as the IB Diploma. If a student has to choose the diploma over protecting the GPA. So that is from the Director of Admissions of Harvard University, or former Director of Admissions perhaps, Marilyn McGrath Lewis, basically saying the diploma is challenging. In America, where they have this grade point average on their report cards, which has some factor, said, look, we don't care about the GPA if they've got the IB Diploma. We recognise it's hard. We recognise it's challenging, but we recognise that the kids who come out of it are fabulous. I don't think there is anyone who does not respect the IB, says Panitha Ott, the admissions officer of Brown University, another top Ivy League US college. UK universities are following suit. Now the US, to be honest, those quotations I've been using for years, 5-6 years. 5-6 years ago, when I was a school principal, the UK was, for give you an example of a course, a liberal arts course, the UK was saying 40 IB points out of 45 or 3 A's at A-level. Now, that exact same course, they're saying 35 IB points, these top universities, or 3 A's at A-level. So the universities have lowered their points offers for IB kids. Anecdotally, we had a few students last year who got those offers, still didn't make those offers. They came down in a few subjects, 31, 32 points, still led into the university. And cynics might say it's because they're paying international fees. No, these were UK students, so they had the right to pay UK fees, and they still got into those universities. Reason being, the UK universities are also saying, give me an IB kid every day of the week. They are so well prepared for higher education. Anecdotally, those students are also saying they're so well prepared that when they go to university, whereas the kids from, say, A-levels in the UK are saying, university is really hard, I don't know how to do it, it's, I'm being asked to do things I don't understand. Instead, the IB kids are saying, wow, this is easy. They're asking us to come up with an essay question and write one. We're used to doing that. We do that all the time. They're asking us to write a 2,000-word essay. I'm used to writing a 4,000-word essay. I'm ready, and their grades reflect that. So in that sense, I think it's clear that an IB diploma education is not only academically equivalent, but actually universities are beginning all over the world, not just in the US, who always respected the diploma. All over the world, they're starting to say, give me an IB kid every day of the week, and I will give you a fantastic offer, and we'll get you into our college. So we basically have looked at the overall picture. We looked at what the diploma program has that really sets it apart in terms of being broad and balanced, in terms of trying to develop particular learning skills and trying to develop particular student characteristics. The broad and balanced nature, I think, let's be honest, it can make it challenging. I mean, I think you tend to find that students who are very good at maths and sciences, the diploma program is a bit of a breeze because they can do quite well in the languages. Students who are very good at languages and find maths and science challenging, they sometimes find it a little bit harder, but there are more accessible maths courses. There are more accessible science courses. All students of really all abilities can undertake the diploma. They can get 24 points, and they can have this wonderful education where they've looked at all 6 subject areas. They've studied the theory of knowledge, and the nature of knowledge. They've written an extended essay. They've been involved in creativity, activity, and service, and they've had other skills developed in the process. So, and all of those great things included, they've also been studying content that is right and relevant and useful for the world they live in now with its global issues, and they're going to go and get a great university place after it and be front of the line for some great learning, possibly some great jobs and all those things. My final point is that the IB continues to work with higher education authorities in each country to help with alignment. So it's not a done deal. Was a principle in Germany where there's very specific desires and requirements from the German education system and the German university system. And the IB has worked tirelessly with them to try to kind of align and make sure they're being supportive and make sure their program fits in with what German society wants, and so on and so forth. So all the while this relationship continues in all these different countries with all their different cultural desires and needs, actually the IB diploma will only get better and better, and it will be more and more regarded around the world. I think that's about it from me today. I'm hoping that there's been some useful information there for you as prospective parents, and I'll be very interested to know that as you weigh up your alternatives, what sort of things you're looking for. But I can say as a principal, as a teacher, and as a parent that I really think the IB Diploma has something for everybody and will really get your child in a perfect position to be successful in the future. And that's all from me. Thank you very much.